taking a look at this Texas A&M team that they will have to take on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Offensively, it's been a really impressive team to this point in the season, averaging close to 36 points a game, averaging 464 yards per game at over 6.7 yards per play. Really impressive what they've done, and a lot of it has been through the air, which I think when you look at the weapons they have, it does explain a lot of that. Marcel Reed at quarterback. Like I said, I'm not the biggest Marcel Reed guy, but he is playing better this year. He's completing 60% of his passes, 269 yards a game. He's thrown 9 touchdowns, just 2 picks, close to 9 yards per attempt. It's been a good year for him, and they've hit the big plays, and a big part of that has been big play receivers. Mario Craver, Mississippi State fans obviously know him very well. 24 catches for 474 yards, averaging almost 20 yards of reception, 4 touchdowns on the season, 119 yards a game for Craver. He's having a very big year. And yes, he has been a big play guy for the Aggies, but he has expanded his role. For Mississippi State, he very much was the guy where State's going to take a couple deep shots to him a game, but that's kind of it. He's being a sort of an all-around receiver for the Aggies. KC Concepcion, the transfer out of NC State, another very good player for them. 20 catches, 340 yards, 3 touchdowns for him. After that, it's more a lot of rotation and sort of other guys who can step up in an individual moment. 8 catches for 97 yards and a score for Terry Bussey. 7 for 48 for a tight end in Theo Mellon-Orstrom with 1 touchdown. Nate Borkirker, however you say his name, also has a touchdown catch on the season. But the passing game, it's really Craver and Concepcion. But those 2 guys are explosive enough that gives them more than enough to work with. And then when you look in the running game, again, plenty of success there. Have not been a dominant team on the ground to this point, which is interesting because I think that was the thought process coming into the year, was this was a team that would really lean on its rushing game more than almost anything else. But they are averaging 169 yards a game, or 169 and a half technically. Le'Veon Moss, still the top guy there, and really by a big margin when it comes to getting the carries. 54 carries for 307 yards, 5 touchdowns, averaging about 5.7 a carry. Reuben Owens has seen 18 rushes for 134 yards, so he's averaging almost 7.5 yards per carry. Been sort of an explosive runner for him. 22 carries for Amari Daniels, although not at a very high yards per clip. Marcel Reed this year, 32 rushes for 119 yards and a touchdown. So really his legs have not been as big a part of the factor to what they've done so far this season. And I think some of that is, it does contend a little bit on the teams that he's played. 10 carries for 66 yards against Utah State. Ran it a good bit in that game. 7 carries for 37 against Notre Dame. Had some big runs in that game. Auburn was not the best day, negative 23 yards. But obviously you have to remember college football, the sacks factor into that. And they were sacked a few times against the Tigers. But that said, and you do talk about what we've done from an offensive line standpoint, only giving up 6 sacks on the season. I actually would like to look real quick how many of those came in the Auburn game, because I think it was quite a few, actually, or it might have only been a couple. No, yeah, 4 of those sacks. 4 of A&M has allowed 6 sacks on the season. 4 of those came against Auburn. So last week was kind of a rough game for them from a pass protection standpoint, and that is a good Auburn defense with some good players in the defensive front. Other than that, their offensive line has done a really good job of protecting Reed. And obviously him being a dual threat, he's able to extend some plays, avoid pressures. But the last week was sort of the first time that they were really able to get after him. So, look, this is a dangerous A&M offense you have to contend with. When you have multiple weapons in the receiving core that can really hurt you, handling that can be really tough. Mississippi State saw that last week with Tennessee and all the weapons they had. Obviously, multiple guys in the backfield that can hurt you, and you do have to deal with more of a run threat at quarterback. And I think from an offensive line standpoint, look, Mississippi State was able to create some disruption against Tennessee. I was really impressed with State's defensive front. A&M's got a better offensive line than Tennessee. So how do you deal with that in this game will be a big question for them. But I think, in some way, I don't want to say they're a better offense top to bottom than Tennessee. Tennessee's put up more impressive numbers overall in the season. I think Tennessee's probably still the best offense, but I think A&M, from the number of ways they can hurt you, is right up there with Tennessee. I think this is going to be a very similar test for the Bulldog defense. It's going to be a tough Aggie offense for them to have to limit in this game.
It is, and you mentioned how it could be a similar challenge than what they faced against Tennessee. I think that kind of comes with its advantages, not a full-on advantage for Mississippi State, but to have that experience that you just had, um, learn from your mistakes that you did make and transfer that over to this game. If you could clean some stuff up, I mean, we'll do predictions at the end of the show, but I mean, I don't see how this game gets well. I guess in a way it could get out of hand. Texas A&M could probably do what they want to do in this game. They're really good up front on both lines of scrimmage, offense and defense. And Mississippi State, we've seen kind of have its issues on both sides, but also be improved from a year ago. So I feel like this is going to be a game won in the trenches, and whoever can win up front, I think, can win this football game. Overall, I would say that, um, like, honestly, I don't see a reason Mississippi State doesn't keep this game close. Not to jump too far ahead in the show, but just to kind of throw that out there.
They're going to have a chance, but you're going to have to play a really good game for sure. Looking at the Texas A&M defense, it's been a solid unit, but also an up and down unit. 24 points allowed per game so far, and look, that does reflect all games because they've given up 22 and 24 points in a couple of their lesser opponents. 307 yards per game, 4.7 yards per play. Those are not numbers that are going to jump off the page. And again, like I said, Texas against Notre Dame, another good offense they faced in the non-con, gave up a lot. 40 points in that game and quite a few yards. 429 yards, over 6 yards of play for Notre Dame. Now, against an Auburn team that's got a lot of talent offensively, we know Auburn's offense has not been special to this point, but man, the receivers they have and with what they have at offensive line, they've got some talent at running back. To hold Auburn to 177 total yards of offense at over 3 yards per play, really impressive from the A&M defense. And again, they were able to create a lot of disruption getting after the quarterback in that game, and that's kind of the big thing you have to contend with this Texas A&M defense. They are one of the top teams in the country at generating pressures, averaging 8 tackles for loss per game, 3.5 sacks per game on the season. 10 different players have recorded a sack for the Aggies at this point, led by Cassius Howell with 4. Now, 3 of those sacks did come in one game, I believe, against Utah State, but he did have a sack against Auburn. Linebacker Damian Stanford has two sacks, one for Scooby Williams, one for Torian York, one for Dayon Hayes, who's another good defensive end for them, and several other players with 1. So have a lot of guys who are able to get after the quarterback and generate pressure. And that's kind of the big thing you have to contend with when you face this team. Against the run, it's kind of been an up and down season for them so far. UTSA ran for 203 yards at over 6 yards per carry against them. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know if there were some explosive runs in there that kind of skewed that total. Sometimes that happens, but 33 carries for 203, that's not the type of day you want to allow, even in a season opener. Then they were great against Utah State. Notre Dame, it was kind of a solid day. Notre Dame ran the ball for 136 yards at about 3.5 yards per carry, but they held Jeremiah Love to just over 4 yards a rush, and that's Jeremiah Love, who's one of the very best running backs in the country. So they were able to limit him a little bit. And then Auburn, they shut down the run game. Now, I know Hugh Freeze really didn't run the football in that game. Auburn's running backs just didn't get touches in that game for whatever reason. But still, it's been an up and down season for Texas A&M from a run defense standpoint. And I do think Mississippi State, we saw it against Tennessee. Tennessee's been a good run defense team, but State was able to find some success running the football. We'll see how that translates over. Fluff Bothwell to this point has proven that he can find ways to make things happen, even when the protection up in front of him has not been the best. But this is not an A&M team that you can run on super well. Again, there's some good players in that defensive line. Torian York and Scooby Williams at linebacker are 2 very good players to have to contend with. So it will be a little bit of a challenge. In the secondary, when it comes to pass defense, solid. 190 yards per game, about 58% completion percentage, 5.8 yards per attempt is very good. They've only picked off one pass though. Giving up 5 touchdowns, just 1 interception. So they've not been a defense that has forced a ton of turnovers to this point. That's kind of one of the knocks on them so far here early in the season. But they also have not been getting lit up through the air, which I say that. I don't know why I said that. From a yards per attempt standpoint, team like that's. Oh, I was looking at the wrong. Sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. They've had. I apologize. 3. I knew I'd looked at this right. 3 of the games A&M defensively has done a pretty good job defending the pass. Those being UTSA, Utah State, and Auburn. Against Notre Dame, CJ Carr had a really big day. Completed 62.5% of his passes for 293 yards with a touchdown. Did throw an interception, but 9.2 yards per attempt is really, really solid. So against one of the better quarterbacks they have seen to this point, because obviously Jackson Arnold just has not played well for Auburn, although Auburn is the best receivers they've seen. But against the best quarterback they've seen, that guy was able to have a pretty big day through the air against the Aggies. And when you look at the guys within their secondary, not a lot of guys who are just putting up huge numbers, but I mean, Will Lee is a very good cornerback for them. Marcus Ratliff, safety, is a good player. Des Ricks at the opposite corner spots is a talented player. And they've got experience. They got a lot of guys back in the secondary who played a lot for them last year. So, and having a veteran secondary is certainly something you can lean on. I think there's opportunities for Mississippi State against this A&M defense. We've seen teams be able to have success against the Aggies. It's just a question of whether or not the Auburn game was a turning point. Here's the question. Was the Auburn game a turning point for the A&M defense? And is Mississippi State going to be able to build off what they've done so far on the road against Texas A&M, coming off a tough loss? Those are kind of the big questions going into this. But look, A&M has had a defense that if you can execute, you can put some points on the board. But State's definitely going to have to play a clean game. And the big thing, unlike what Auburn did, they're going to have to protect their quarterback if they're going to have a chance.
And I think the opportunity to do that is there. I really believe in what this offensive line can become this season. And I know we're pretty much at the halfway point, or we will be next week through 6 games or whatever. But, look, going into the season, you and I have talked quite a bit about this offensive line. You have big bodies up front. It's just a matter of how you want to use them, the rotation and everything. Overall, my assessment would be that it's more than okay, but it's not excellent. I think it's good enough, at least to a point where they got big boys out there on the field and they're giving everything they got against these strong SEC defenses. And well, I know they've only played Tennessee so far, but like Northern Illinois, Alcorn State, they had games where they just looked really good early in the season offensively on the offensive line. And yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that, you know, I would like to think that they're working at it in practice this week, and it's something you could see just continue to get better. Now, are you going to have to face some defenses down the road like a Georgia or whoever? Sure. But for now, I mean, yeah, A&M's got a pretty solid defense, but is it the top notch, top tier defense that we're used to seeing in college football? I think that's going to be something to look into this weekend.
Yeah, look, it depends on what version of the A&M defense we get, which it also depends from MSU from a health standpoint. And obviously, there is a question we got asked early on: is Luke Work going to be playing tackle this week? That is because Albert Reese at right tackle went down against Tennessee, and largely the expectation is he is not going to play. It's not been made official, but I think it was already Pete Nakos or Pete Thamel, one of the two. Already put out the expectation is they're probably not going to have him this weekend. You're already down, your starting right tackle from the season in Blake Steen. Now, obviously, he went down in week 1. You've mostly been without him, and you've dealt with injuries on the O-line throughout the year. But with Albert Reese down, that is a huge loss. And for State against Tennessee, State's rushing attack with Albert Reese in the game versus with not is pretty significant. Actually, one of my friends on that did the math, and I want to pull that up from earlier. And I saw this earlier, just sent in a group chat. If I can scroll and find it. So with Albert Reese in the game, Mississippi State was running for about 4.1 yards per carry at 167 yards. Once Albert Reese went down to, it was 41 rushes for 167, so 4.1 with Reese in the game. When Albert Reese went down, 16 carries for 36 yards, 2.25 yards per carry. So basically almost a yard and a half less per rush once Albert Reese left the game. That is a massive, massive difference for Mississippi State's rushing attack. Obviously, that hurts you from a pass protection standpoint as well. And going up against an A&M team that's able to get after the quarterback, that worries you. And left tackle was a big problem for Mississippi State against Tennessee. Jimothy Lewis did not have a good game. I believe when Javen James was in the game, he struggled as well. And now you're facing an A&M team that's got guys who can rush off the edge. Do you try to move Luke Work back? Obviously, he started games for you at left tackle a season ago. Made, I think, 5 or 6 starts at left tackle for the Bulldogs last season. He also made a start at right tackle in the Egg Bowl. I would explore it. And look, he was not fantastic in that role, but he was serviceable, and it possibly could be better than what you had. I would not at all be surprised if State is working on getting him involved at tackle this week, because from a depth standpoint, you feel like you kind of have to. If you're down Albert Reese at this point, having a guy who has played the position and started games for you within the SEC, it kind of makes no sense to not have him be an option for you at tackle in this game. I think State probably is going to need Luke Work at that spot. Now, otherwise offensively, I think people feel good about Brennan Thompson and his ability. I actually want to check I haven't looked at the updated availability report. I know Albert Reese was apparently downgraded on that, but I know there was also the national report that he's just not very likely to play. Yeah, so I mean, Brennan Thompson at receiver was already upgraded to not even being on the injury report after initially being in. So that's big for Mississippi State, getting one of their explosive playmakers back on Brennan Thompson, who I think might be their best all-around receiver to this point. That also hurt their passing game when he went down. They're going to need Brennan Thompson out there, so have him healthy, ready to go is a big deal. And the other it is worth mentioning Isaac Smith is still questionable for Mississippi State. Obviously, that's talking about the Bulldog defense. We already previewed the Bulldog defense. State's going to need Isaac Smith for sure. They need him. That's a leader of the defense. You want him healthy for this game. But getting back to the point at hand, offensive line is the big question here. If State's offensive line gives Blake Shapen time, I think Mississippi State will have an opportunity to put points on the board and compete in this game. If it is anywhere close to what we saw against Tennessee from a pass protection standpoint, I think on the road they're going to have a hard time dealing with that.